lead series speaker. Today's speaker is Brigadier General Shulstad. He distinguished himself in 3 careers. He was a 22-year elected member of the Minneapolis City Council and the only and last Republican, a successful political campaign consultant to candidates for U.S. Senate, governor, state legislature, and other officers, and an officer in the the Air Force Reserve, retiring as a Brigadier General. General Shulstad's military duties were primarily spent as mobilization assistant with the active duty force. He served at headquarters for 15th Air Force Tactical Air Command and Air Combat Command. His duties included public affairs and worked closely with the integration and utilizations of Air Reserve forces into active duty structure. In retirement, he is a member of several nonprofit boards and commissions. He was appointed by the Secretary of Defense to be the Minnesota State Chair of Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve, where he selected, trained, and led 125 volunteers, mostly attorneys and business executives, to assist mobilized military members with their civilian careers. The program won numerous national honors and awards during his unprecedented 7 years as state chair. As the most recognized Air Force person in Minnesota, he is invited to give over 50 speeches each year at civic and ceremonial programs and is often interviewed by various media outlets. General Shulstad will be presenting on This Isn't Your Dad's Military, and will discuss the massive changes in our national defense from World War II to the present. For the question and answer session, please write down your questions using the notepads at your tables. Everybody should have notepads and pens at your table. We'll collect those, the questions at the end, and we'll give them to the General to answer that way. So please, at this time, let's introduce and welcome.
Except the day Air Force plays Navy in football, and then we take different sides. So, I'm delighted to be here. I know people who have gone to Dunwoody. You're going to meet one later. And I'm very impressed with the Dunwoody work with veterans. It's very, very impressive. Rich mentioned that I have given normally about 30 or 40 or 50 speeches a year, but because of the pandemic, if you don't have an audience, you don't give a speech. So this is the first one I've given for almost 2 years. It's a whole different world out there. And one of these days, we'll maybe be able to get rid of some of the masks and stuff. I came here a couple months ago to see Bill George speak, and he gave everybody a book. And then I was here a month ago, and Art Johnson was speaking, and he gave everybody a book. So I went home and found my 6th grade theme about what I did during summer vacation. And if any of you are interested in one of those, let me know afterwards. I'll be very happy to share that with you. I really had 2 careers. I had one in the Air Force, and I had one in politics. In politics, I'll go back to the Air Force. I graduated from the University of Minnesota in Air Force ROTC. That was back in 1966. My first assignment was in Biloxi, Mississippi, and that was a real eye-opener for a kid from Minnesota. And I was at Keesler Air Force Base, and I was the commanding officer of about 850 young airmen. And they were being trained, they were going through electronics training for the Air Force, and really what that is, that's the Dunwoody of the Air Force. All of these people were learning electronics. And they would spend about 6 months to a year going through that training. And then I had orders to go to Vietnam, and I was going to be doing media relations and public affairs for the Air Force. And about 2 or 3 weeks before leaving, the Air Force contacted me and they said, would you like to be in charge of officer recruiting in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Dakota, and live in Minneapolis, my hometown? I said, ooh, Vietnam, Minneapolis, that was a pretty easy decision. And so I came up to Minneapolis and I was in charge of officer recruiting for those 3 states. and I loved it. A very, very good job. But at that time, I got married, bought a house, started law school, got interested in politics, and I said, gee, do I really want to move every 2 or 3 or 4 years during an Air Force career? And that decision was fairly easy. I said, no, even though I love the Air Force, I think I will leave active duty and join the Air Force Reserve. And that's what I did for the next 20 or 25 years. I was a member of the Air Force Reserve, not in a reserve unit, but I would go about a week each month to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, to the Pentagon, to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, to March Air Force Base in California. So I was really a part-time active duty person. And in politics, I was on the Minneapolis City Council for 22 years, and believe me, I could not win an election in Minneapolis today, nor would I want to win an election in Minneapolis today. But I would also be a campaign consultant to candidates who were running for Congress, for governor, for senator, and for the state legislature. So I was a campaign consultant, an elected official, and a part-time Air Force person. When I retired from the Air Force, that is when I started doing boards and commissions. And so I'm on several boards, I've been on several commissions, and I'm also on the Air Force Chief of Staff Civic Leader Group. And that is a group of 25 or 30 civilians, fairly high-level civilians, who are advisors to the commanding general of the Air Force, all 250,000 people. He's not asking us what airplanes to use. He's not asking us about battle strategy. Instead, he says, we are the eyes and ears for him across America. We are the people who can talk to him about family issues, about recruiting, about retention, about politics in our areas. And so we meet with him about 3 times a year out in Washington. And it's really quite interesting. These are people who are Fortune 500 CEOs. There are people who are media personalities. And all of us give a lot of speeches. So they give us classified briefings so that we know what we're talking about when we talk about the Air Force. But when I made general in the Air Force Reserve, I realized that I could not possibly do both politics and Air Force. And so I had a big decision to make. Did I want to be the only Republican in Minneapolis? And by the way, they call me a dinosaur now because I'm totally extinct. Or do I want to be a general on an Air Force base where people salute a general's car when they drive by? That took me 1 millisecond to make the decision. I left politics and went back almost full-time active duty with the Air Force. And that was a good decision. And I enjoyed my Air Force work a lot. At Air Combat Command, which is all of the bombers, all of the fighters in the entire Air Force, we had 23 bases around the world and about 125,000 people. The Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and now the new Space Force, it cost us about $750 billion a year. That is a lot of money. When you think about what we could do with $750 billion if we didn't have to have our national defense, it's remarkable what we could accomplish. And we wouldn't have any more lives lost. There wouldn't be any more wars. We'll just say everybody in the world can now live in peace. No wars, no national defense, no lives lost, and everybody is happy. But since the beginning of civilization, we have always had wars. We've always had conflicts. I've gone through Europe a few times and I've seen castles. Castles is not just somebody's big mansion they can live in. A castle has a wall around it. It normally has a moat. They've normally hired some people to help defend their castle. And And why did they have to do that? So people in the next council won't take their land and their riches. Simple as that. And that's what happens to nations. If one nation cannot defend themselves, some other nation will conquer them. They'll conquer them, move in, and take their riches and take their land. And that has happened since the beginning of civilization. Now, we're a peace-loving nation. For 250 years, we don't like wars. We'd like to avoid them. However, we've had a dozen of them. Some of them were kind of controversial. A couple of them for our very survival. World War II is a good example of that. Had we lost World War II, and we very easily could have lost World War II, we would not be here today. We would have lost our freedom, and we wouldn't be here. And we could have lost that war. Wars are terrible, but sometimes they have to be fought. And in those dozen wars, 1.2 million Americans have lost their lives. Last Sunday, I went to a Viking game. A lot of people at a Viking game. You could fill up that stadium 20 times with the number of Americans who have lost their lives in wars. 20 Viking stadiums. And these are all young men and women who are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. They have given their lives so that you and I can be here today so we can enjoy our freedoms. I was with General Colin Powell several times. I was very saddened to see him pass away. He was a remarkable man. I wish he had become the president. I had an immense respect and admiration for him. And I learned quite a bit from him. He always said, both as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as Secretary of State, he said the reason we have a military is so the elected officials can negotiate from a position of strength. And so they can prevent wars if at all possible. What's the best war we ever fought? The best war we ever fought was the Cold War with Russia. We didn't fire a single shot, and we won that war. When I would go to Air Force bases, Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, Minot in North Dakota, Offutt in Nebraska, there would be a big sign in the front of that base. Welcome to Ellsworth Air Force Base. Peace is our profession. Welcome to Minot Air Force Base. Peace is our profession. Now, what a strange thing to say when behind those gates are enough nuclear weapons to blow up half of the world. But because we were so strong, we were able to win that Cold War without firing a single shot. When you're not prepared is when you're more likely to have a war. World War II, we were not prepared. And most of the nations in Europe were not prepared. And Hitler and the Nazis just took nation after nation after nation because they weren't prepared to defend themselves. And we could have lost. The only thing that saved us is the fact that we had a couple thousand miles of ocean so that they couldn't bomb our production facilities, and we were able to build thousands of tanks and planes and ships. Or we could have lost World War II because we were not prepared. And we have to remember that every war is a political decision. It is not made by the military. The generals and the admirals do not decide if we're going to go to war. The elected officials who we elect are the ones that decide, number one, what is our budget? Number two, how much of national defense will we have? And number three, will we use them in combat? Those are not decisions that are made by the military. The military merely carries out the wishes of the elected officials. That's because we're in America. We do not allow our military to make those decisions. My dad was a World War II bomber pilot. He wasn't a warrior. He was a college student. He was going to be an accountant. He was 20 years old, went into combat, and he flew B-17s. A B-17 is a bomber that would have a crew of 10 people on the plane, 10 Americans. They were told that if you survived 25 combat missions flying from England over Germany, and this was early in the war, if you survived those 25 missions, you've beaten the odds, and we're going to give you a medal and send you home. And that's what they did with my dad. On one mission, the colonel got up in front with all the pilots out in the audience, and he said, "How many of you have an airplane that's capable of flying today? It isn't so badly shot up from the last mission that you're able to actually fly that plane." 17 hands went up. And he said, "The 17 of you are going to be taking off in an hour. And you're going to be bombing a ball bearing factory in Germany. And we're just going to try to put it out of operation for a couple, 3, 4 weeks if we can." Those 17 planes, that's 170 Americans took off. 9 of those planes were shot down. I mean, that 90 Americans either died or were captured in that one mission. And by the way, they never did find that ball bearing factory. That was a typical, no, not quite typical. On most missions, it was 17 planes, 1 or 2 or 3 of them be shot down. Anybody in here willing to take a Delta plane tonight where you know there's a 10, 15, 20% chance that you're not going to get to your destination? They did that 25 times. They said, "Dad, you were a hero." I said, No, I wasn't a hero. I was an American doing my duty. And after his 25 missions, he was sent to Texas, and he was a pilot instructor. That's where I was born. I'm a Texan, but only for 6 months. He went down there with a pilot instructor, came back home, and went back to a civilian career as an accountant. And that's what happened to most of the people who fought in World War II. They saved our freedom. They saved the world. They saved the world. And most of them have died by now. But the ones who are still alive, if you know one, go thank them. Thank them. These are the people who charged the beach, Normandy. Thousands of Americans. I've been to Normandy. How many of you have been to Normandy? Every American should go over there. Every American. They charged the beach, up cliffs where there were machine guns above, just mowing them down. I've been to their cemeteries, the 19, the 20, the 21-year-old kids. If that doesn't get you, nothing will. These are heroes. And so are the people who join our military today, because they don't know what they're going to be facing. We're not going to be sending out 17 bombers on a mission and have 9 shot down. That wouldn't happen anymore. Because today, through technology, and this is technology that Dunwoody is teaching, this is why we're doing so well, because we're now using advanced technology for war fighting. We wouldn't send 17 bombers with 170 Americans. We would send 1 bomber. This is a B-2 stealth bomb, made 20 years ago. We only have 21 of them. They're based at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. We would send up this one airplane that had 2 people on it. It would carry 16 in a normal mission. 16, what we call smart bombs, very small bombs, but very, very accurate. It would hit 16 different targets and turn around and go back home again. It would have virtually no chance of being shot down because it has stealth technology. We can talk about that later. We no longer need to use great big bombs. These are smart bombs that if this room was the target, would come in through the window. And probably the rest of the school will still be standing. Because you don't have to blow up a city. You don't have to have atomic bombs if you know what your target is and you have the proper technology. And I keep on using that word technology because that's done with technology. That's a big change. So here's the first change since Dad was in the war and what we have today. The first change is we don't have nearly as many weapons as we did during World War II because we don't need them. There were 39,000 bombers built in World War II. Many, many, many of them were shot down. 39,000. Today, the entire United States Air Force has 150 bombers. We don't need 39,000 because we have some of these. And we're developing the next bomb. Technology, it always keeps on changing. It changes from when civilization started and people were fighting with each other, they'd use their fists. And then they decided if you throw a rock at somebody, that's more effective than using your fist. And then they said, well, let's use bows and arrows. That's better than throwing a rock. And then they developed guns. So you could shoot somebody at a longer distance. And then they got high-powered guns or machine guns. And then it moved from there into, gosh, World War I. An airplane might be of some use in combat. Probably not much use, but it'll be good to get up in the air and see what the enemy is doing on the other side of this hill, so we'll use an airplane. But they're not going to be of a whole lot of use in combat. Then World War II. And airplanes were very important. Very important. We probably wouldn't have won World War II without our airplanes. But those were the old airplanes, remember, the 39,000 bombers. And they just keep on improving. And so then we've gone to stealth technology. So that radar can't see your plane. And there's a much lower chance of the plane being shot down. And now the technology is moving on to, civilians call it drones. In the military, we have to have acronyms for everything. So it's a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle. Easier to call it a drone, actually. But you can have an airplane that is being piloted by somebody sitting at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota or Minot, North Dakota, that's flying 3,000 miles away. And they see exactly what's happening. They can attack if needed. And so if they see there's a car that they need to destroy, they don't have to call anybody. They can destroy that car right from that unmanned aerial vehicle. In the future, we may not have pilots. In the future, we may not even need to have 2 people on this plane. We may just have them in unmanned aerial vehicles. That is technology. Technology improving all the time. I talked about stealth. That was vital. It was vital in the first Gulf War. We were supposed to lose 50 airplanes the first night of the first Gulf War. And then the president was told we were going to lose probably 50 airplanes that first night. Because they had some French-built anti-aircraft missiles that were quite sophisticated. Well, the generals told the president that we have some advanced technology that has never been used in combat before, but we think it's going to work, and it's called stealth. And we didn't lose 50 airplanes that first night, we lost 2. What stealth did that night is, I like to use the analogy, a duck hunter. A duck hunter with a very expensive shotgun who's an expert shot. And here came our planes, the ducks. They would aim at them and shoot them down. Except we put a blindfold on the shooter, so they were shooting blind. And they got lucky and hit 2 airplanes, not 50. Technology. Technology. Will stealth work forever? Of course not. Because adversaries of ours also know about stealth. They also know about developing technology, and they are developing technology just like we are. And so pretty soon, stealth will not be important. But today, in the recent future, it was very important. So that's the first big change. Not as many weapons, because we don't need as many weapons, but the ones we have are very high technology. So if you don't have as many weapons, and you're not going to have thousands of people charging beaches of Normandy, and you're not going to have thousands of pilots flying all those airplanes, you don't need as many people. So we don't have as many people. Back in World War II, 12% of the American population served in the military. Today, it is less than 1/4 of 1%. 1/4 of 1% of our American population served in the military. But every one of those people is highly trained and highly educated. My friend who's a retired Army colonel, he said that the soldier today, walking in the field, is a walking computer. He said they are remarkable. We don't have very many of them, but they're good. And that's the way it is in all of the services. If today we had 100 people walk into a recruiting office and say, I want to join, 75 of them would be turned down. And why would they be turned down? They'd be turned down, number one, because they don't have a high school education. They'd be turned down, number two, because they didn't do well enough in their aptitude tests. They would be turned down because they're overweight. Or they'd be turned down because they had a background of maybe drug use or a criminal background. Remember in the past the old joke that it wasn't even a joke, it was true. Well, the judge would say, young man, you're in big trouble. Would you care to go to jail for a year, or would you care to join the Army? And they'd help join the Army. And that would turn them around in many, many cases. But that's not the case anymore. Today, 75 out of 100 people cannot get into the military. That means these are pretty well qualified folks. Oh, and that leads us into the third major change. For the past 50 years, every single man and woman who has joined the military has been a volunteer. For over 50 years. There's no longer a draft saying you have to join. Now, do you want to join? Can you compete, and can you get in? What an improvement. They have to be good because their weapon systems are high technology. Women. When I was in ROTC, women weren't allowed in ROTC. When I was commissioned, women were not allowed into West Point, Annapolis, or the Air Force Academy. Women were only doing a few of the jobs that the military offered. Today, they can do virtually every job in the military, and 30% of our active duty force and reserve force is female, and they are doing a terrific job. The Air Force just promoted their second 4-star female general. And heaven help us if we ever go to war, because we hope we don't, but if we do, she's going to be leading much of the combat from the Air Force in that war. And I have immense confidence that she will do a terrific job. 30% of our force is female. Again, everyone is a volunteer. Another big change When I used to go out to the Pentagon, every general, every admiral would say, our Guard and our Reserve made up of really good people. They're very well intentioned. They were called weekend warriors, remember? The weekend warrior thing. But they're not really of any great use to us in the military because they're using war surplus equipment, and only if you have a major disaster will we be able to use them. Today, you cannot find a single general or a single admiral who will tell you that we can provide national defense without our Guard and Reserve. The Guard and Reserve go through exactly the same training as our active duty force. They're using exactly the same equipment. I was a reserve officer on a base, and I was exactly the same as any active duty officer. And when I made general, there were 5 of us, 5 generals for all of Air Combat Command. And they didn't make a bit of difference if I was a reserve general or an active duty general, not a bit. A third of our active duty force today, or a third of our national defense, is our Guard and Reserve. Again, every single one of them is a volunteer. And these are people who have civilian jobs on the side. Good civilian jobs. So, we have a large small active duty force and a fairly good sized Guard and Reserve force. I want you to meet one. Chase, stand up. I can do that because I'm a general and he's a specialist. Chase is a graduate of the school. He's also a member of the Army Reserve. Good for you, Chase. That is the future of our nation, right there. People like Chase Olson. And he makes me very, very proud. So we have some organizations that help these Guard and Reserve people. One of them is called ESGR, Employer Supported Guard and Reserve, because all of these people have civilian jobs, and they're good civilian jobs, and they have to leave for not a month, sometimes it's for a year. And that civilian employer has to get along without them. What we do is we have 125 lawyers, judges, corporate executives who make sure that the employers understand what the laws are protecting our Guard and Reserve people, but also make sure that they go above and beyond what the law requires to make it easier for them to serve. Some of them make up the difference in pay. Some of them go and help remodel their homes. They do a lot of things to help. And they don't just say, we have to have you, we can't fire you because the law won't let us. Instead, they say, what can we do to help you? What can we do to make it easier for you to serve? That's what we do with ESGR, Employer Supported Guard and Reserve. We also have an organization called the Minnesota Military Appreciation Fund. We have Roger and Nancy over here. They're benefactors. Stand up, I want them to see you. If I can make change, I can't order you to do it, but I can order change to do it. Roger and Nancy are on the board with me for the Minnesota Military Appreciation Fund. They're benefactors to this school. They help veterans in this school. They do so many things for everybody. This is a fund that has now raised $18 million in the state of Minnesota, all from private donations, and we give every person from Minnesota who has served in a combat area after 9/11 a check for $500 and a letter of appreciation. And if they've been injured, more Purple Heart, they get up to $10,000. We've done 15,000 of those grants in this state. We are the only state in the United States of America doing this. And that makes me very proud, very proud. Because they were told, do not wear your uniform back home because we disagree with our foreign policy and you were a baby killer. You went over there doing that. And they were told not to wear their uniforms back home. Today, people realize that you can disagree with foreign policy. That's perfectly all right. But don't take it out on the military. It's your elected officials who make those decisions. It's not the members of the military. And that's been a big, big change. We also have another organization, this is the last one we'll talk about, the Minnesota Military Family Foundation. The Appreciation Fund gives them money and a check for serving, whether you need it or not. Many of them give the check to somebody else. The Family Foundation raises money for those people who have financial difficulty due to the fact that there's a deployment in their family. An example would be, my husband is in the Army Reserve. He's now spending a year overseas. He's normally a carpenter back home. He makes $60,000 a year, but right now he's making $35,000 a year. My car broke. I need $1,600 to fix it, and I don't have it. That night before she goes to bed, somebody will knock on her door and give her a check for $1,600 and say, thank you very much for being a military family. And that is paid for by those license plates, where it says support our troops, and it's got an eagle on it. You pay an extra $50 for that, that money goes to the Family Foundation. We are the only state in the United States doing something like that. Again, we can be very, very proud. So the bottom line is the military has changed dramatically. Changed dramatically from World War II. But the mission is the same. The mission is very simply, how can we protect the freedom of this country? And how can we defend this nation? And how can we be so strong that we can prevent and avoid wars, if at all possible? John Colin Powell, I'll finish with this, had a couple of great quotes. One of them, he said, to avoid wars, be strong. But if there is a war, we're not trying to win 50 to 49 in overtime. We're trying to win 99 to nothing and limit the number of casualties just as much as we possibly can. And you do that by having high technology, by having good people, good weapon systems, and a good national defense. And Dunwoody is doing their part. And that makes me proud. Thank you so much.
So if you have a question, why don't you go ahead and hand them to me, and I'll take them up to the general.
Oh, by the way, on questions and answers, if I'm giving a political speech, it's very simple. If I don't know an answer, I tell you anything I can make up, because any good politician can make up things. But when it's a military speech, and I don't know the answer, and again, it's very simple. I tell you it's classified, so... Okay. The first one is, do we spend our defense budget wisely? Well, that's a great question, but it's classified. Actually, it's a very good answer for it. No. No, we do not. We do not spend our defense budget wisely at all. We get $750 billion a year, and that money is all allocated by elected officials. And what is the number one thing that's thought of by elected officials? Where is this produced and where is it going to be based? Whether the military needs it or not, no matter what the level of importance is. So therefore, we could do a whole lot better spending the money if it wasn't for political interference. But on the other hand, remember, this is America. And politicians do run the military and do run national defense. And who do politicians report to? You. And that's why we can improve that. But no, we are not spending our money wisely. What kind of impact do you think the lower number of veterans that our society has had on the nation's political leadership and the presidency? Oh, that's another very good question. Classified. Yes. It has made a big impact. From President Eisenhower, the next 7 presidents have all been military officers. And yet the last 3 have not been. They have not been in the military. And in the past, members of Congress and Senate, most of them were veterans, and today a very small percentage are veterans. And what that means is that you don't have nearly as much political knowledge of what's going on in the military. That doesn't mean you have to be a veteran in order to know what's happening, but it sure doesn't hurt. And that has definitely impacted our military and our national defense. What can or should the United States technology industry do to prevent theft, loss of critical intellectual property, IT intellectual property? Boy, that is another classified answer, believe me. China is killing us. They are stealing from us much of our technology advantage. And the reason that we are in the lead and where we need to stay in the lead is because we do have a lead in technology. And we're losing that. And that is one of the biggest issues facing this country, is the fact that, that we develop it and then it is being taken by potential adversaries. And I don't know how to prevent that. That's a higher pay grade than mine. And in fact, it's a higher pay grade than anybody around. We don't know how to solve that problem. But it is a major, major problem for our national defense. What is my understanding of the U.S. and allies' ability to defend Taiwan and our allies in the region? Again, this is a political decision. This is not a military decision, what we would do. But what I do know is that it is being discussed at the very highest levels of national defense, at the very highest levels, about what do we do with Taiwan and if there is an invasion. They do war games constantly. That was part of what I was doing at Air Combat Command. We were overseeing the every scenario. If this nation does this or if this nation does this, how are we going to respond? And all of the different options for responding. It's much like a football coach preparing for a football game. You're trying to figure out what is the enemy or the potential adversary going to do, and how are we going to respond to that. I don't know that answer, but I do know that it's a big challenge facing us, and it's why we're very concerned about China at this point. With the resurgence of Russia and Chinese communism in updated forms, but will continue regional aggression, does the U.S. need to develop more structure for our returning veterans to help fortify, and can we have a civil defense network? A civil defense network, really, that's our Guard and Reserve. That's our Guard and Reserve. And so if we do have a national emergency, that's where we have people who are fully qualified, fully trained, with current weapon systems. And let me tell you a little bit about the National Guard. The National Guard, again, all volunteers, you're all old enough to remember 9/11, that horrible, horrible day. You'd look up in the sky, and there were no airplanes. No, there was one airplane. It was an F-16. It was flying from Duluth in Minnesota. There were 3 of them down there. This was really classified at the time. There were 3 of them at the airport here. One of them was undergoing maintenance. One had the pilot in the seat, fully armed, and ready to take off in a matter of seconds. And the other one was already up in the air. Their mission was very simple. We do not know if any airplane approaching Minneapolis is dangerous. If there's a crop duster, are they going to be dropping biological things on us? Or they're going to be, we don't know. We don't know what to expect. So your job, very simple, shoot down any airplane in the air. One airplane was in the air, one was on the ground with a pilot in the seat, the other one was getting refueled and repaired. From Duluth, flown by civilians. Their family did not know where they were or what they were doing. It might have been a Northwest Airlines pilot, it might have been a school teacher, it might have been somebody from Dunwoody, it could have been anybody doing those jobs, and their families didn't know what they were doing. And they did that for over 6 months, sitting out at our airport. That was your National Guard. Oh, and by the way, if there's a natural disaster, fire, flood, something like that, call out the Guard. All volunteers, all have civilian jobs. All of them are ready to do whatever their nation asks them to do when they're needed. And this one I've already answered about China, so. I thank you very much for inviting me today. You are in the front line, and it's so important. Dunwoody is doing a good job. Dunwoody has a higher percentage of students who are veterans than any of the other schools in this area. And people like Roger and Nancy, who fund veteran programs here, so important. And your president, a veteran. How many of you are veterans? Okay. When I go out to a school, well, not school, but the people who are 30 years old, it would be like that, just 2 or 3 named people. When I go and talk to people who are much older, how many of you are veterans? Almost every hand would go up. It's a big change, but that's not bad. It just means that things have changed. Things have changed. And they will continue to change. But we can only hope that we can continue to have our strong national defense. It's not a perfect country. We certainly have things that we can improve in this nation. And when I ask people if they've ever bought a lottery ticket, they all say, oh yeah. I say, you don't have to buy a lottery ticket again. Because you're living in the United States of America, so you've already won the lottery. And not only have you won the lottery, but when we complain, we're allowed to complain, but if we complain about it, I don't see anybody moving out. But I see millions of people who are trying to move in to our nation. We have to defend it. Thank you for inviting me.